The thing that I was most impressed by in your book was the fact that you overcame a stutter as a child, and that seemed to have been a fairly formative experience for you.
Believe it or not, I'm not totally free of it, but only a stutterer knows when it's coming close, and you hope you can avoid it. It's a tough situation.
And did that
most of the time I'm free of it, because some people are very tough on stutterers. They have very little time for people, and that is the very time you need to have not only humility, but also empathy. Because the person has a condition, and I think the way it is now, it's a lot better understood. But when I was growing up in the 50s, it was a lot less understood, and people would often think you were somebody different, and that's not right and not nice.
Absolutely.
I'm one of the fortunate ones. I worked hard at it, and most of it is behind me now.
That's great. So in looking at your book, I was struck by the fact there are a number of places in the book where you had to make tough calls.
Yep.
You've been a CEO 3 times of public companies, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what some of the toughest calls you had to make while being a CEO 3 times, and how those decisions on those tough calls helped you succeed, so perhaps other CEOs and CEO wannabes could understand the importance of tough calls.
Yes, so I didn't actually have a large amount of chapter material around the tough calls, but it's kind of woven throughout the book. In my case, I had to make some very tough calls which were easier to do, such as reducing the number of corporate aircraft from 4 to 2. That was easy.
Why was that easy?
Because it got a lot of applause. So that was an easy one. But here was a difficult.
There was still an aircraft left for you.
We need it, and we can have a long debate on that subject. Nowadays, I'm very proud to fly commercial. So that was one. The second one was, the one that really was the tough one, where the rank and file was probably not going to be happy. I had gone to Schering-Plough, and the sales and profits were in a downward spiral. Because
that's part of the reason you got the job.
I was here in Atlanta with 3,000 people, salespeople, and we had just frozen the dividend, or actually reduced the dividend, taken away their bonuses, frozen the salary increases, and here I'm telling them.
You also gave back.
And I gave back. I was going to get about $2 million as sign-in bonus, or just somebody coming in, joining bonus, and I gave that up. But it's important to do that up front.
Well, especially if you hadn't already spent it.
Oh yeah. In my case, fortunately, and the book says it, I learned how to live well with modest means early in life, so I've always had a very happy life around money. So give that up. But I was asking them to go from 60-40, these are salespeople, 60-40 fixed to commission split to 80-20. Because I wanted them to think more like medical professionals talking to doctors, as opposed to hard-charging salespeople trying to make their commission for the month.
So only 20% of their comp was going to be commission as opposed to 40%.
So we actually raised their base salaries, but there were many of those reps who had actually bought large homes, who were buying things on the come in terms of being big commission earners, who were suddenly going to be very unhappy. And here I am, the first time in front of all these people. They thought I was going to go and say, sell more, let's make more money. And here I'm telling them that, number one, we're not going to go with this commission plan. And number two, as their new CEO, I'm telling them that if they ever have to choose in terms of making a sale or walking away from a sale, as their new CEO, if the sale doesn't feel right, walk away from it.
And what does that mean? I read that in the book, but I didn't know what that meant.
In other words, don't do anything that's not appropriate just to make a sale and make the commission.
Unethical.
Anything unethical, anything on the edge. Don't go there. And so I wanted to give them clear direction on that subject. And I thought that they were going to say, well, here's this new guy. What does he know? We're going south right now. Why is he telling us these things? He should be talking about other things. And to my surprise, there was a very uncomfortable wait. And then this started to applaud. They stood up and they applauded and applauded and applauded. And it was a cathartic.
But they weren't applauding the commission cut, they were applauding the ethical stance.
I think they were wanting to say that we are good people. So, because at that time the company was in hot water.
Right.
The DOJ was looking at the company, there were all kinds of investigations. And I said, we're going to differentiate ourselves by earning trust. And that means long-term relationships, not the short-term monthly commission out of hard pressure selling. That was the message I wanted to leave with them. And in fact, the fact that they adopted that had a huge effect on them in terms of my relationship with them, because after that, I could speak to them with a lot of credibility. And the change process started to kick in, at least with the frontline people, as a result of that.
There were a couple other places in the book where you talk about tough calls. For instance, in trying to build a team, because you talk a lot about the fact, you know, the leader has to set the pace, has to set the example. Then you have to pick the team that will then also lead by example. And you talk in the book about sometimes you have to make a tough call and get rid of the rock star.
Yes.
Now, in order to be a rock star, that means you're you're a cash cow. You're doing something that is helping the company to succeed. Why would you then want to get rid of a rock star and talk about that tough call?
This is something which I think a lot of CEOs don't do a good job at, because a rock star is somebody who's a very good individual leader. Individual contributor, or who has such a such a special agenda that he insists on loyalty to him personally from all the people that he has reporting to him, which means they probably should not be very loyal to the other people.
Right.
That goes against the idea of a one company culture. So if you have a rock star who's chasing this very narrow agenda, which is going to make him or her
rich,
very important and rich down the road, you have to confront that issue. Many cases you can talk to them early on and ask them to change their whole approach and change their whole attitude. But in many cases, many cases, you have to get rid of them just to prevent toxicity.
But then
from
you
creeping
lose their contribution to the bottom line.
It is surprising once you can open up the culture, open up the atmosphere, how many people, once the sun starts to shine, how many good people can actually rise. Because the same rock star creates a big shade under them and doesn't allow all the people to get the sunlight.
Okay,
So
but the first time you did that as a CEO, weren't you concerned about that consequence? That you were essentially cutting off your nose to spite your face?
It's a big concern, and I'll give you one story. I was in Sandoz in New Jersey, and this was a very tough situation. This person was a rock star in charge of our mental health area, and I didn't know much about it. It was just an area he owned. He knew all the top doctors, and people were saying,
he controlled the space.
He controlled the space, but he was not a productive member. And in order to do whatever had to be done, I did move that person out. It did for a while set us back. I even got calls from a few senior doctors saying, what did you do here? Your company's image is going to be hurt. I'm not going to write your products anymore. Okay, I did get those calls, but it's amazing.
What did you tell them?
I explained to them that, look, we have to move on. We have to find some new people here, and if you just give this new person who's now got the job a chance, you will be surprised how good the relationship can be. And this company has a relationship with you. It wasn't the person who had the relationship with you. It's the company that has the relationship with you. But the important thing was that the culture inside changed dramatically. People saw that I really meant it. Yeah, the grass was growing, and I meant what I said. And I do write in the book that this company, which was in deep difficulty, went into strong double-digit growth territory. And Sandoz today is Novartis, which is a very, very strong company.
One last tough call I'd like you to talk about, and then we're going to move on to another topic. And that is, again, something that's a very difficult choice for CEOs to make, trying to pick which members of your team to promote into C-suite jobs. And you talk in the book about the fact that there are essentially, 5 types of criteria that boards ought to look at in terms of choosing a CEO, but you also say for the C-suite, you also ought to look at these 5 criteria, and these are attitudinal things like, does he or she actively seek coaching for him or herself? Does he or she have a high leadership EQ? And you recommend that you should knock out a candidate for a C-suite job if they fail or missed just one of those 5 criteria. How often did you do that as a CEO, and did you ever regret that tough call?
As we've discussed different succession decisions, even at the division level, this thing has been a very important part of my contribution. I believe very strongly in it. If the person doesn't build a strong team that role models the behaviors, you're never going to get the culture that you need. And is the person doing that or not doing that? Or is the person more about himself or her? Is the person...
But did you ever regret knocking somebody out of the running on one criteria?
On
Because
hindsight,
they went to join a competitor and did better there, say? Or
I
became the
probably
CEO of the
should.
competitor?
I'm sure I was wrong with some selections, and if you were to ask me about people who might have done well afterward, I'm sure there must have been some.
But on balance, it
On
was
balance,
the right call?
I had to do the culture work that I had to do. Many of these people who move on, they actually do very well in smaller companies where they can have it as their own empire.
Right.
If the person is not part of the culture, not part of the team, if the person is not thinking outside himself
Right.
or herself,
And
it's
role modeling.
and role
leadership.
modeling, it is not going to add to the culture, because my belief is, I'm a deep believer in the power of the individuals, and individuals contribute to making a culture. So it comes from the people, and if you don't work on that, you will never get outstanding performance. So sometimes people say, well, he got great results financially and he also built a good culture. I would say
One follows the other.
the one follows the other, and if it's sustainable financial results, it has to be from the culture.
Right. What lessons would you offer her from what you did at Schering-Plough to get past compliance issues? Talk about the mirrors, for instance.
Yeah, the mirror is a very important thing that I'd like to just give a short story on that, if that's okay.
Sure.
So Brent Saunders, who is now the CEO of Bosch & Lomb, was the head of compliance at Schering-Plough, and he had mirrors planted at all sites, and there was an 800 number at the bottom. And the idea was to tell people that if they saw something happening that was not right, to call that number. And they would not be identified, or if they would be identified, they would be protected. But in fact, there was a wrongdoing aspect. Let's stop it quickly and let everybody be part of the compliance system. So that move was a very strong move, because it
So that was
helps
a lot of
change the culture.
mirrors.
It was a lot of mirrors, but it was really a good idea. But there was a deeper meaning to that, and that was, look at yourself. We all own the problem. We all own the solution. Pointing fingers is just not enough. Do something about it and make this company strong. There was a hidden aspect about culture that really went over very well here.
So do you think Avon should do the same?
I'm sure that people there are doing a very good job. The advantage we have is that Sherry McCoy came out of a tough compliance culture at Johnson & Johnson, and the new general counsel came out of a very strict compliance culture at Novartis.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have two people who do have a good understanding of what compliance means.
But you also talk in the book about the fact that business integrity is not just something you do in order to comply with the law or with regulators. And in fact, you said at one point in a global town hall meeting in April 2003, you said, let's look to business integrity as a way to differentiate ourselves by earning trust. And so what does that mean exactly you did at Schering-Plough, and what are the implications for Avon?
Well, business integrity is so important because if we can earn trust, we can then get market share at a discount. We can do a lot of things. When people trust you, when your customers trust you, so if you're there with the customers, make claims that are accurate. Don't exaggerate.
To get the sale.
And don't tell things that, and do tell things that need to be told. So in both ways, do the right thing. If you are out there with the health minister in the Philippines, and there's an expectation for a gift, there is no need for that. You belong to this company. You do what you have to do in terms of a professional relationship, not because another Japanese company is giving a big gift. So do the right thing. In the long term, you will do better in the Philippines than the Japanese company. So that's the whole idea here.
One last lesson I wonder whether you've shared with Sherry or Brent is the whole question you talk about the need to try and get visible and not spend a lot of time on analysis paralysis, not wait till the grace period ends.
Yeah.
Of course, the grace period, as many CEOs have realized, is getting shorter and shorter. Boards used to give a new CEO 18 months, 2 years to start proving that their turnaround plan or strategy was the right one. Now, there's talk that some CEOs who've only taken office the last year or so are not going to make it to the 18-month mark. And so, why is that so important, and to what extent have those CEOs followed that particular lesson of yours?
I think you're right, the grace periods are becoming shorter and shorter, partly because the investors are becoming more anxious to get quicker returns. There's a much bigger sense within the investment community to go after IRR, internal rate of return, as opposed to multiple. Multiple means you'll hold the asset for many years, and then you'll get 4x or 3x or 2x or 1x or 1.5x. But IRR means I want my 20% now, and so there's a sense of this IRR, which is putting more pressure on the boards, and they in turn are having to put more pressure on CEOs. I'm not necessarily a big fan of the short term. I think in many cases you have to let the CEO do what needs to be done. But you're right, there is much more scrutiny. And if I were an incoming CEO, I would put in the measurement sticks, the milestones, so that people can see the progress without having to promise an immediate resolution to the problem that I'm inheriting. At least show the signs of progress so people can see the green shoots.
But at the same time, you talk in the book about the fact that you stopped giving earnings forecasts.
Yes.
And so if you're being measured, that is a measurement, quarterly results to the extent to which they match your forecast. So how can you believe in holding people accountable when you're not giving investors any guidance on what to expect?
In my particular industry, because it's driven by a research and development cycle that goes between 5 and 15 years.
It's meaninless to do
It was
quarterly.
actually meaningless to do quarterly numbers, because you can be a hero for 10 years by cutting your research a little bit every year and making everybody happy. In the end, you have nothing left on the other end. So there was a reason why I didn't do it. I explained my reason, which is measure me on cash flow, measure me on research progress, measure me on penetration into new markets, and I will show, and also on the top line, because we had 17 consecutive quarters of double-digit sales growth. So measure me on things that show the business is healthy, but don't get me stuck on a numerical number that doesn't really mean a lot in terms of the success in the business model. Surprisingly, the investment community accepted that, and they actually gave us a better price earnings multiple than most of our big pharma peers.
Okay. One last question. To what extent have you recommended to Brent and Sherry that they disclose their major objectives for the coming year, which you did at Schering, at a global town hall meeting every December, which I think was very admirable, but not very many CEOs do that. Is either one of them doing that? And if asked, would you recommend that they do that, or was that particular to Schering-Plough?
Everybody has their own cycle, but in my case, I used to do that in the December for the following year, because also in that December town hall meeting, and this is about 40 or 50,000 people listening in, it was an opportunity to reflect on the progress for the year, and then talk about the 3 or 4 things that mattered, and then ask people to set their own clear line of sight to their own objectives. Forcing people to do this in a systematic manner so that the whole organization gets aligned gives you a lot of power in terms of execution. I am very confident both these CEOs do it in some way or the other, but they all have their own style.
Let's start with building trust inside the company, which is really the focus of your book. What are 2 or 3 things, maybe the 2 or 3 most important things that a CEO should do to build trust?
In my approach, it is not only the top people that you appoint, who have to be very credible in their own right, very quickly try to get to the frontline managers, which in a typical company of 50,000 people might be 8,000 people. Get to them so that they start to feel that they are ambassadors from the center and not just representative of the front lines. They are really there passing on the message. Show them the strategy. Show them that you value them. Get to them in different ways. Listen to them in small groups with dialogues. feedback what you're learning. That's extremely important, because if you can energize the front line, you can get a 20 to 30% productivity improvement within the first 18 months. That's one of the low-hanging opportunities that CEOs can easily get to. And then make sure that you take care of the middle. Don't make them feel that they are frozen out. Make sure that they also get the nurturing that all people need.
How do you deal with that, with the middle, once you've made connections with the front line? Because for sure, you will have heard from the frontline folks, well, Fred, your vision is clear.
The way I would do it is get the middle to understand the strategy also. Get them to understand what you expect of them as leaders. We all know that one big reason corporate America has a low engagement rate is because the immediate supervisor is doing a very poor job engaging them. Right. So show them that they have a responsibility to the company to excite the frontline managers, to pass through the messages in a very effective manner. But typically in many companies, the frontline managers don't get the attention that they deserve. The top guys do get a lot of attention.
So, at the conference board, we focus not just on performance, let's say, within the company walls, but we also spend time looking at macro issues, macroeconomic issues, macro business issues, and so forth.
What's happening is that as boards look at evaluating people to be CEOs, people are looking for a bigger purpose, a bigger sense of purpose in people, CEOs who can create a bigger sense of purpose, who can do well by doing good, and who can also elevate the status of business leaders in society. Mm-hmm. I think if you go back to the last 5 years or so, and you look at the people who are now being appointed CEOs, that criteria has come into the decision-making process.
And it wasn't there, you think?
It might have been a lot less so 25 years ago when it was shareholder value, yeah. And I think boards are changing as well. Society is also probably I think this whole status with society may have now leveled out, and hopefully it'll start to go up going forward.
That's sort of an optimistic view, but I have never heard actually anyone articulate the fact that the criteria are changing and that the people may be changing, and that if we or the characteristics of the leaders in the future may be different than in the past because of what boards are doing.
The reason I can say that is having been on boards, and when we even look at division heads, this new element in the dialogue has definitely come in. Yeah. Because there's a growing perception now that you don't do shareholder value and then do some philanthropy on the side and think you're doing a great job. It has to be part of your business.
How does that, we were chatting just before we began the official interview here, we were chatting a little bit about activist investors and so forth. Yeah. How are they part of this dialogue?
Activist investors usually have a very tough agenda, which is how do you unlock shareholder value, usually in the near term. I have nothing against them. They have their own role to play here. To the best of my knowledge, they have not played a big role in the conversation in this regard.
Have you ever run into situations in candidate selection, whether it's at the CEO level or maybe just at the next level down, on the boards that you're serving on, where people are pushing back on the notion of this higher purpose? Not that anyone would be opposed to the higher purpose,
but if there's an element here that's a little light in terms of the peripheral vision, yeah, and a sense of doing
the
right thing and being a part of the ecosystem, today's boards would pick the other guy. That's my, at least on the boards I'm at, yeah, we would pick the other guy. Because the old model will inevitably lead to a lessening of the freedom to operate. Yeah. What business needs is a freedom to operate, and if you don't have a good contract with society, it's going to reduce your ability to operate very well.
Right. We call it sometimes the license to operate. We forget that society grants us the license to operate.
Absolutely. And also, the world is rapidly becoming global. Yeah. About half the business of large companies is now overseas, and you have to be very sensitive to how things are overseas as well. Yeah. Because you're competing with Japanese, German, many other competitors, and you have to have this bigger sense of the world, right, when you're out there.
Last question about trust, yeah, within the company walls, or outside as well. Is the U.S., distinct in this regard? I mean, is there a stronger sense of purpose? For example, we're seeing in the UK some really quite extraordinary pressures being put on companies from society, so to speak. As you think about globally in the companies that you're on, is the U.S. an outlier here, or has it really become a global phenomenon?
I think the U.S. is more in the lead in terms of real, authentic sense of purpose and doing it right. In Europe, we've now had for about 20 years this concept of corporate social responsibility, CSR. I think it's a little overdone. These are specialist activists who have a special agenda, and they tend to play that. And then European companies react with checklists and trying to keep people happy. I think the U.S. is beyond that.
More sophisticated.
Much more sophisticated.
Yeah.
And the decision making in the boards when they are selecting CEOs and division heads, I do believe that's becoming much more sophisticated now.
One last point about this.
Sure.
What about China? How would you think about these issues in the context of China? Have they emerged yet?
You mean in terms of competition with China?
No, I mean in terms of companies operating in China and the societal pressures, if any, that Chinese society puts on companies. Is there any yet, or is it really still just
I think
about growth?
companies, the U.S. companies are realizing very quickly that if you're in China, you must be a local citizen and seen as such. You have to be fair with the pricing, and you also have to be fair with the claims you make, and don't take advantage of an underdeveloped country's medical system by selling products that are not appropriate. Do the right thing, sell the right products.
Now, imagine a board now governing above that kind of company, where the company is behaving according to the principles in your book, and the CEO is behaving according to the principles in your book. It seems to me that board is going to have a pretty different role than, let's say, a board might have 20 years ago.
Yes.
How does that work? And you must have experienced that at Schering-Plough, but how can you imagine, it's not just a transformation perhaps from the CEO down. From a governance point of view, don't a lot of things have to change?
I think board members in a place which is well managed should still be asking important questions.
Sure.
For example, organizational health. 4 or 5 key questions. Is it safe to speak up here? I mentioned that in the book. A normal number might be 60%. Is that getting better? Are we 70, 75, 80? Just the basic engagement score.
Yeah.
If the standard is 50 and we're at 60, then we're already 20% more productive than our competitors. Board members should be asking organizational health questions, which they might not be asking 20 years ago, because that long ago they might not even be measuring that stuff. Right. Now things like that do get measured. And modern CEOs do it anyway without trying to react to their boards. But boards should be engaged with the evolution of the company. Also board education, which is extremely important and which was very well done at Schering-Plough. If you can immerse the board in strategy in a very open manner, then they can actually help you and advise you. But presently, in many instances, the CEOs are saying, let's not get the board too active because then they'll start taking up my time. Right. I personally believe that educate the board, let them understand it so that they can be helpful to you. Right. CEO can leverage the board in a very positive manner.
I guess the last question would be, what advice would you have for a board that wants to go into that direction? They have a CEO who's read your book, has adopted it, has come on board, and now the board has to say, okay, we want to play our part. What are you going to?
I would say that
what help?
What we have presently in our country a very good financial auditing infrastructure.
Right.
We have public accountants, we have internal auditors, we have our own CFO, and they do the job every quarter in measuring the financial health of the company. But that's a lagging indicator.
Right.
The leading indicator is organizational health. So if I were a board member, I would say, show me what's going on inside the company with clear metrics, and show me how they're getting better longitudinally. And those things are measurable these days. Yeah. And some boards ask that question, others don't. In my case, in all the companies I went, I actually did that and shared that with the board. Right. And I also shared that with the entire employee base, because I told them up front, I'll tell them where we're doing well and where we're not doing well. And once the numbers come in, I'll also share with you how we're going to improve the numbers going forward by changing the culture in the company.
Right, exactly.
So these are like just that question about is it safe to speak up here?
Right. What
If
percentage?
that number kept going up, a lot of the compliance issues would start to disappear. So rather than chasing the thing through a financial
Through
angle,
compliance, you could chase it through that question.
through the other way.
Right, very
Absolutely.
interesting. Okay, fantastic.